Hey there and welcome back. Today's video will be a little bit different from the ones that you might have previously seen on this channel. Today we will be building a link tracking system, something like bit.ly, but on our own payload infrastructure. This will not be a perfect tutorial. What I'd rather like to do is show you the entire process, how actual coding goes on. So this video might be longer and more unscripted, but feel free to let us know if you like this format and if you would like to see more of it. So let's get started. I have a small plan laid out for today. So basically we want to create trackable links out of our payload backend. We want to track the link clicks so that we get statistics. We want to show those clicks in a timeline, probably in a table within our payload backend. And what we also want to do is we want to show these statistics. So for example, last 7 days, last 30 days, or last 12 months in a chart. The rough plan to accomplish this will be to create two collections. The first one will be a tracked links collection. This is where we actually create the links that we want to create and where we store the slug and the actual link target. Also, we will create a separate collection where we will store the actual link clicks that occur. The reason why we separated this into a second collection is that if we would store it in the actual link itself, it would basically grow indefinitely, which is not a good practice. Apart from that, what we need to create is a custom express route to handle the redirects. And we also need to make sure that the links are not /admin or /API so that it doesn't interfere with the default payload features. And last but not least, for data visualization, it's always a bit tricky to find a good charting library. There are a few of them out there. What I wanted to try for this video is using the Tremor charts library, which is built to create React charts. As our code base, I'm going to use the code base from the Payload Next.js tutorial series, the backend code base. But you should be pretty much able to start this from a default boilerplate payload project, but you should have implemented Tailwind CSS before that. We've created a separate video on this topic. I will probably link it in the info section or down below. So let's get started creating our collections. Like I said, I will create two collections. The first one will be tracked links. So this is pretty standard. We need to give it a slug. Let's also give it labels. And then for fields, we can give it a name just for our internal use. But the most important two parts are the actual internal link. I will call it slug in this case. So this is the link that we will put on our website or wherever we want to add this custom link. I'll explain it in a second, which is also type text. We'll make it required. And the other important attribute is, let's call it the href. So the actual link that it should call. All right, I will create the second collection straight away. So tracked link clicks. Doing the same thing here. Labels, fields. So for the fields, I'm not entirely sure what makes sense to store. You could basically store as many information as you want. You could, I don't know, store the IP address, whatever. That might get you in trouble because of data privacy regulations. The most important part that needs to be stored is the actual link that is clicked and the exact timestamp that the interaction has occurred. The timestamp is automatically saved by Payload just because of the created at attribute. But what we need to store is the actual link that is clicked. So tracked link, yeah, it will basically autocomplete pretty well. It's also a requirement. That should already be enough. Maybe we will add some additional information later. Now let's add our two collections to our payload config. Just going to separate it a little bit. All right, let's start our development server. We're getting some error here. Oh, no, that's actually the front end. I'm in the wrong repository, but the backend has an issue as well. Field track linked has invalid relationship undefined. That might have occurred because we didn't import our collections. And if you create a relationship field, Payload actually checks if this collection exists. So let's try to start it up again. Still crashes. Yeah, so that's that's a danger if you rely too much on autocomplete. Obviously, we need to add relation to and then say tracked links. You should always think for yourself. Obviously that collection needs to go, that's incorrect. So now everything should, yeah, it seems like it works. Let's check it out. All right, this is our Tailwind component from the last tutorial, but we should now see two collections, tracked link clicks and tracked links. I'm just going to create a first one. So Google test, the slug will be /Google, and the href will be https google.com. So just as an additional explanation how this works is, basically we have our backend server. Right now it's localhost 4000, but this will be on your own domain. And this will be the slug that you can call here. So let's say slug Google. So if you would call our server /Google, this would then redirect you to the href to google.com basically. This is how it will work. The next thing that we have to build is the actual functionality that gets a request, then saves a tracked link click to this collection here, and then redirects the user to the actual page. So the way I'm planning to do this is I'm planning to actually create a custom express route in server.ts. What we could do in theory is create our own custom view within the Payload admin dashboard. The issue with that is that it's a little bit slower because you have to load Payload first, and also we could only use links that start with /admin. So this is how it would look like. And obviously it's better if we could just cut the admin and just shorten it to just say Google. That's why we need to create a custom route below Payload. So I'm just going to create a standard express route by saying app.get, which means this will listen for a GET request. For the path slug. So it is important that we define this as a dynamic slug, because obviously we want to catch all the different custom track links that we have created here. We might run into some issues with that later, but let's see how it goes first. So I'm just going to create a standard arrow function. So let's see what we need to do. First of all, we need to get the slug from the URL. Autocomplete helps here. Basically, we just have to use rect.param since we defined the slug here. So next step would be to count the link click. Probably first we need to find out what the matching link is. We need to count it, and then we need to redirect to the link's URL. I'm just going to start by doing the redirect, which is just res.redirect. Just going to say payloadcms.com for now, which is static. We need to replace this later on. So now we need to find the link with the matching slug. What we can do here is use the local payload API to actually retrieve this. So what we can call is await rec.payload, which basically the cool part about payload is rec.payload contains the entire payload object. You could also import payload just by using payload and then just importing it. I probably already did here. However, I have run into some issues in the past where this hasn't been defined yet after the initialization, so it's better to call rec.payload in my experience. So now I'm going to say find collection track links, and we're going to define a where query where the slug, and now we need to say equal. So this is an important part. I've spent dozens of hours just trying to find out why my query doesn't work. You always need to say equals, not equals, includes. You can't just say slug is slug. That will not work. So as you can see, it complains about the await because we need to make it an asynchronous function. Obviously, we also need to store our response here. So let's say const link docs equals await defined, and now we can actually say the track link equals linked docs. So basically the first element, but not linked docs, but linked docs dot docs. So this will get us the track link if it exists. Let's see if this already works by just console logging the track link and calling our backend again. Just waiting for it to reload. Now let's say localhost 4000/Google. So it redirects us to the new and awesome payload website, but it should also, as you can see, it's console logged undefined, so something seems wrong here. Let's see, maybe we should console log the link docs as well. And we might also console log the slug to see if that works. So now I'm calling our custom middleware again. Okay, it redirects. And now we get our console log as well. So it recognizes the slug, but as you can see, it doesn't find any docs that have the slug Google. Now let's see. Yeah, so here's the issue. I put a slash in front of Google, which obviously doesn't make any sense. So let's try again. It redirects, and now we actually get our tracked link document with an ID. Now the next thing that we need to do is we need to count the link click. So remember, we now have the ID of our tracked link. So now what we need to do is we need to, we can await it, rec.payload.create, and we need to create in the tracked link clicks collection. And as a data, we're going to specify the tracked link, which is the ID of the tracked link. Let's see if that matches our attribute name. Yeah, it does in this case. So this should already work. And what I'm going to do at the same time is I'm going to replace this static payload redirect to not tracklink.url, thanks Copilot, but to href, because in our tracked link we specified the href here. So let's call our custom middleware again. Just waiting 2 seconds for the server to restart. Yeah, and now the redirect works. We are being sent to google.com, and also we should be able to see, yes, our first registered link click. To make it a little prettier, what I'm going to say is, as a title in the track links, use as title, I'm going to specify the name. So that way payload doesn't only show us an ID, but it actually shows us the name of the tracked link. So if we refresh the page, yeah, we should now see it's a tracked link for our Google test. And that's pretty much already it for the bare bones functionality. One thing that I want to check here though is, currently we're calling localhost 4000/admin. So in theory, it should also trigger our custom express route, which obviously shouldn't be the case, because this should only fire if we actually call a tracked link. So let me just see console.log. I just removed the other logs. Hello from custom middleware. And now I'm just going to refresh our default payload admin panel a couple of times to just see if our middleware gets called. Right? And it actually seems like it's not called. So in this case, it already works. This might be too early to celebrate, but let's check again if, so obviously Google should work. This should, yeah, hello from custom middleware. Let's put in another link that doesn't exist yet. So payload. Okay, so now we get an error because actually the server crashed, which shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't happen. So let's find out the reason. Cannot read properties of undefined reading ID in server TS line 33. So our slug seems undefined. I'm guessing that this is the ID, because obviously it can't find anything related to that. So what we might have to do here is to actually put in a fallback. If the track link doesn't exist, then obviously we should just, let's just call next. That way it might still try to get that document from payload, which might cause unnecessary load to the server, but at least it won't crash the server anymore. So maybe we will optimize this later. Let's try again. Yeah, cannot get /payload test 1 2 3. I mean, obviously it won't work, but our server is still up and running. No issues with that so far, which is great. So I'm just going to remove our console log again for now. So the next thing that we will do is actually do something with the data that we generate, because now we got our track links clicks here, but this doesn't really help a lot, especially if you have, I don't know, 2000 track links clicks. It's just a mess. So my goal would be to be able to go to a track link, just open it, and below our inputs, what I would like to have is, first of all, maybe a table, like I said, showing the exact times, but also having a chart that shows the statistics, which is probably the most important thing here. So let's start with that. In order to build this chart, I decided to use the Tremor library. So this is the Tremor library, and it's basically meant to build, React charts and dashboards. I actually just discovered this recently. I've never used it, so let's just see how it goes. First thing I'm going to do is actually install it, and then let's just check it out to see how we can start using it. So how do I get to the components? All right, here. What probably makes most sense is either to use a bar chart or a line chart. I would just go for the line chart for now, but obviously this is up to you if you want to build your own thing. So let's see. Before we can do that, by the way, we obviously have to create our own custom component. So I'm going to go back to our code base. In components, I'm going to add another component. So link click chart.jsx, going to make it a default boilerplate React component. And before we change anything in here, I'm going to add it to our track links. So the way that you add custom fields in a specific document is you go to the collection, and what you can do is you can create a field type UI, and then you can just say admin components. And here you can specify two things, cell and field. So the cell actually shows up in the overview list of your collection, and the field shows up in your document when you edit it. So I'm just going to say field, and I'm going to import the link click chart here. So let's restart our server. Collection, track links, value doesn't match. Type UI, admin. Maybe it's, no, it's not component. That's the thing, you do this stuff over and over, but sometimes you just forget how it works because of the autocomplete. So let's just check the Payload website for reference really quick. React components. I'm just searching for field right now. It probably makes more sense to look for the UI field. In here, let's see, admin.components.fields. Ah, got it. It actually, I configured it correctly. I just forgot to add the name. So I'm just going to say link click chart. Name doesn't really matter here because no data is safe whatsoever. We just still need to add it here. So let's check if it appears in our tracked link. Yeah, as you can see, it appears below our input fields. So now let's try to add our line chart from the Tremor library. I'm going to copy the import, go back to our custom component and import it at the top. And now I'm basically I will just copy this user example for now and then adjust it to our needs. Link click chart. I can remove this one. And let's see if this already works out of the box. Obviously, we will need to generate our own chart data. Yeah, it doesn't work, but that's because I messed up and imported it multiple times. So let's go back, refresh. And nothing seems to appear here, which is not good. Export default, import as link click chart was not found. I probably messed up the default. Yeah, export default. All right, and now we can see something, but it looks pretty weird. That might be an issue with the Tailwind styles. So let's see if we need to import the Tailwind base components maybe. If that changes anything. Let's do a complete refresh. No, it doesn't fix anything. Okay, so I will probably pause the video for a second and figure out the solution and come back. Okay, so obviously what helps is to read the installation guide, which tells me that it's not enough to just install the library, but also we'll have to add specific other libraries, for example, headless UI. I'm not sure if I already installed this one. I'm just going to do it. And also the Tailwind CSS package for that. Tailwind CSS forms and remix icon. And now we also have to adjust our Tailwind config. Wow. This will probably take a little bit of work, so I'm just going to copy it, go into our Tailwind config file. Just going to paste it down below. Okay, let's see how this goes. So I'm probably going to, yeah, this is TypeScript, which we are not using here, so this is not important, but let's put the import to the top. And let's just build this one, the low one in here. So I'm going to add content. No, I can't add it. I have to adjust the one at the top. So I'm just going to add those Tremor modules. Now I can delete this one. For the theme, I don't know if I have, yeah, no, this one is empty. So I'm just going to copy it. And paste it in right here. And then we need to adjust our save list or add it. I don't think we have added any save list. Nope. So that one here, and we have to add our plugins. Now I can delete this stuff and add it down here, restart our server, and let's see if that makes it any better. This is taking quite a while. I'm just going to hit pause. All right, now it refreshed and it seems like it's actually working fine. One reason for the long waiting time might be that we added so many things to the save list that it probably has a pretty large bundle size right now, but we can optimize later. So this is something that we could start working with. Let's check out the data structure. But before that, I would like to take a quick break and ask you if you are enjoying this format so far. I mean, you can expect it to get a little bit more structured and better later down the line. It's new for me as well to talk and code at the same time. Another idea that we had is to do live streams as well. Maybe also answering a few questions that come up, etc. So if you would like to see that, let us know in the comments below. So let's take a look at the data structure that we need to provide our chart with. It seems like it's a simple array of objects. We have a date, we have semi-analysis, and the pragmatic engineer. Those are the two categories that we can see in the chart itself. And I'm guessing that the date acts as a sort of index to, yeah, as you can see here, this is the index and those are the two categories. So for us, it will probably be simpler. We will only have one category called link clicks. So we can remove the other one. And we can leave the date for our index. Now we can replace our data. I'm just going to create very simple mock data. So let's say link clicks and see how it looks now. Yeah, so this is a little bit annoying that it really takes quite a while now to rebuild the bundle. Obviously that won't be an issue in production, but at least for development. So yeah, now we only have 2 data points, but it seems to work fine. We have link clicks here, link clicks on the right side with 2 dates. Now what we need to take care of is fetch our link click data and then actually format it and use it in our chart. So for this, I'm going to create a state const link click data. Set link click data is a state, and I'm going to use a use effect to fetch the data and then update the state. what I'm going to do in the use effect is create a separate function that is called in here, which has the async keyword. This avoids race conditions, it's just a good practice, and this will act just like a normal use effect. So I'm going to say const response equals await. What I'm using is the Axios library. It's basically like fetch, just has a little bit different features. .get, so I'm using /API track link clicks, and I'm going to, the data is res.data.docs, very important detail. And now I'm going to set the link click data to our data, and I'm also just going to console log it for now so that we can check if everything works as expected. So now what this should do is it should basically, whenever the component is loaded, it should fetch all the tracked link clicks and set the state, which we can then use to display our data. Obviously we'll still have to import use effect, and I'm also going to import use state and not call react.useState, but just use state. Okay, let's restart the server, go back and refresh the page. So let's see if we get our data logged into our console. And as you can see here in our console, we can see our 2 tracked link clicks. So now that we have our data here, we actually need to prepare it for the chart to correctly display it, because we can't just put our array of timestamps in our chart, because what we basically need is an array that has every object has another date, and it has a count of how many how often the links have been clicked. And we don't have this here because those 2 are the same date, and each of them should be counted as 1 click. So how our data should look in this case is actually, today is the March 8th, and link clicks 2. This is how our data should look like. Now, we sort of have 2 options where we want to format our data. The first option would be on the client side. So what we could do is we could adjust and map and reduce our data that we get from here, so our tracked link clicks, and then display it. The issue with that is that if we have, let's say, 5 link clicks per day, this won't really matter. This method is fine. However, if we have 2,000 link clicks a day, every time we want to show our chart, we basically have to fetch all link clicks from, let's say, the last 7 days or the last 30 days, then compile our data and then show it, which is a massive waste of computing power, also network load. It's just not a good practice. So what I want to do at this point is I want to create a custom handler that uses the Mongodb aggregation pipeline to actually compile the data on the server side and basically just send back this exact array that we can then put into our chart. Now this is definitely more into the advanced territory here, but since this is not a very scripted video, it's the best solution and I just want to show it to you. So what I'm going to do here in collection for the tracked link clicks, what I like to do as soon as I introduce any handlers or whatever, I'm just going to create a separate folder, tracked link clicks, where, sorry, not .js, it's just a folder where I'm going to put my collection config. And then within that folder, I'm just going to create another folder called handlers. You could also do the same thing with hooks, etc. That just separates the code a little bit, and I just like the structure. So in this handler, I'm going to create an actual handler called getChartData.js, which just is export default rec res next. It's just a standard, I'm just going to name it as a function. It's just a standard Express middleware. So just going to say res.send 200, .status, and send a message, whatever, test. So what I have to do now in the track link clicks, I have to add this endpoint. So say endpoints, and in an array I'm going to create an object with path. So I'll just call it get chart data, and the method will be get, and the handler will be get chart data. But I'm just going to say chart data handler. I always like to call them handlers so that I know what I'm actually importing. Chart data handler. All right. So we have to save our payload config. This sometimes happens if you have structural changes. For example, I moved this collection config. Now I have to go into payload config. It automatically updated the import, but sometimes I just have to hit save so that it actually saves the file and the server won't crash. So let's check if our API endpoint works. So I'm just going to call /API tracked link clicks get chart data. It says the requested resource was not found, so I'm just going to check if I have a typo in there. Tracked link clicks get chart data, get chart data. I will have to specify that. No, it just says it's not, couldn't find it. Let's try again. Yeah, so note to myself, you have to add this / before your path so that it actually works. Now we get our test back. The next step now is to create our actual aggregation in our custom handler. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in ChatGPT just to show you how you can use tools like these efficiently, because obviously you don't have to use it. You can just use Stack Overflow or whatever, but they can really save you a ton of time, especially when it comes to those more complex aggregations, etc. So what I'm going to prompt is I'm going to tell it to create a MongoDB Node.js aggregation that uses a collection. You don't have to be 100% correct here, of timestamps, and aggregates it for a chart, for displaying it in a chart. Output, for example, 12th of February, 400 clicks, 13th of February, 347 clicks. That should be enough context for it to know what I'm actually trying to achieve. So let's see what it comes up with. Okay, it's done replying to me. Yes, obviously we'll have to install MongoDB first. We can ignore this connection stuff. We don't really need that. The only thing that we're interested in is the aggregation pipeline that it comes up with. So it uses the $project stage to actually convert the timestamp to a date string. which it does here, and then it groups the aggregation by this date field, and basically for every document it counts one click, and also it sorts it by date. So let's just copy this aggregation pipeline and see if it already works or if we need some refinement. So I'm going back into our middleware, going to paste this in here, just going to call it pipeline. So we don't, like I said, we don't need to do any connection stuff, we don't need to handle anything. The only thing that we have to do basically, I'm just going to copy this from somewhere else, from another code snippet, but you can actually access the Mongoose model in Payload directly by calling payload.db.collections, and then obviously you'll have to adjust it to your collection, which is tracked link clicks. Just going to call it that way, track link click. And if we want to use this pipeline to aggregate, what we're going to do is going to say the atlas results equals it's await track link click dot aggregate, and within that we pass our pipeline. Now obviously we'll have to make our function async, otherwise it will complain if we use await. Now what I'm going to do is, instead of returning test, I'm just going to return atlas results. And let's see if this actually works out of the box. So let's get back to our custom endpoint and just hit it again. Yeah, so it seems like our server crashed. Let's check what the issue might be. Payload is not defined. Well, obviously that's an issue, so let's import it. Let's see if we need to import anything else, but this looks fine. So let's restart our server and go back to our page, call our endpoint again. Yeah, it crashed again. Now it seems to be a real issue. Invalid format character. So it seems to complain that this is actually not a valid way to transform a date to a string. So what I'm trying to do right now is I'm going to hit Command I. You need to have Copilot for that, but obviously you can just paste it into ChatGPT. I'm just going to see if it comes up with something right here. This is giving me the following error, and I'm just going to copy this one in here and see if we can solve it. The modified $selection placeholders code. Okay, so this is total nonsense. Just going to ask ChatGPT again to give me more context. If I remember where my actual ChatGPT window went, here it is. So just going to paste in the error. Even have the typo in there. So this doesn't seem like we're really getting anywhere. What I will do in this case, I will actually do a good old Google search. So we've broken down the issue to this simple formatting thing for now. So I'm just going to Google Mongoose aggregation convert date to string. I'm just going to check out the actual Mongodb docs. So in here it looks like it's using very similar formatting, but it's using a large Y for the year. So I'm just going to replace it in here and see if that maybe even fixes the issue straight away. So let's wait for 2 seconds and call our endpoint again. Yeah, so as you can see, we don't get a perfect response yet, but we get clicks too, which makes sense. And the underscore ID is null, so let's see why that is the case. Yeah, so here we're basically saying that the field that we're converting here is called timestamp, but here we're using the date field, which doesn't make any sense, so I'm just going to replace that with timestamp. And let's see if that will give us our requested format. Let's refresh. It's still null, unfortunately. Maybe we'll have to fix something else. Let's see if it helps if we name it date, because the project, the actual date field. Still null. Okay, apologies for the confusion here. What we're doing in this project stage is we're creating a new field, which we are calling date. So this is why we are referencing date down below. Now, here it's already written in the comments. This assumes that our timestamp field is called timestamp, which I've just changed to date. So since we're not using the timestamp field, whatever, but we're using the created at field, we obviously have to say created at in here. Now, if we refresh our server, that should fix the issue. Yeah, so as you can see, now we have our date formatted here with clicks 2. And this is basically the perfect format for us to use in our chart. So our aggregation is basically complete. What we need to do now is go back into our custom component here. And instead of calling /API/tracked link clicks, we're going to call the get chart data endpoint. And this doesn't return any docs. So it's going to say data. And if we console log the data, that should actually give us the exact same data that we just got back from calling it. So let's refresh our page here, go back into one of those. Sorry, it's where did we put that in? Yeah, obviously that's the incorrect collection. To go into our track links. And now, as we can see, yeah, we have our array, clicks 2, and the underscore ID in this case is our date. So it already seems to display it correctly, set link click data. Yeah, but that's because we are still using our placeholder data, which we are going to remove now. And instead of our placeholder data, we're actually going to use link click data. And also we don't need our value formatter because that just adds a $sign to our number, which we don't need because we're not using any monetary values. We just want a clean number of the link clicks. So if we refresh, we actually don't see anything here, which means it doesn't seem to work. Let's console log our link click data to check if it actually changes. Maybe there's an issue with re-rendering. What I'm also going to change is our title here. I just have to format it. All right. So let's call it link clicks. So now we get to see which line was it. Line 11. So this is empty at the beginning, but then it's actually filled. So it seems to be an issue with re-rendering the actual data, which is quite unusual because usually it just automatically updates. So what we could do here, let's try it out to say link click data.length. So what we will do is we only render the actual chart if we already have some values in it. So let's see if that makes any difference. Nope, still no change whatsoever in here. I might have to, that's the issue with less popular libraries, you probably won't get a lot of information about it. Tremor re-rendering. So this seems more related to their date picker, not to the actual charting library. Let's see. And again, it is not an issue with the re-rendering. I just looked at the data structure again, and obviously we have the underscore ID attribute here, which is not the date attribute that we specified as an index. So we can get rid of this whole re-rendering thing. And let's see if that fixes our issue. And it does. We can actually see our date here. But there's another issue. We have clicks here. Obviously, we called it link clicks. So let's just say clicks. And that should bring back the data that is actually displayed. All right, seems like we got our data. The next thing that I want to add is a toggle that allows me to toggle between a 7-day window and a 30-day window, because right now it will just put everything that it can find into the timeline. And what we also have to do is filter for this specific link, because currently it will put every link click in here. But before we do that, one thing that we need to take care of is securing our custom endpoint. So this is our custom endpoint, and by default this is actually not protected against anything. Basically it's a public endpoint. So in order to avoid this and make it private, what we can do is we can check the rec.user object, and since we don't have any other admin users here, whatever, there's only one admin users collection, and no other collection that has authentication enabled, we can basically just check if there is a rec user, and if there is none, we can return an unauthorized status. So let's quickly check if this works. For that, I'm going to call our endpoint from within the browser window that we are authenticated, and we should just get a normal response back as soon as the server has restarted. Yeah, so we just get back our URL response. Let's now open up a new private window, call the same endpoint, and as you can see, it doesn't seem to work. So if rec.user, let's console log rec.user. And call it one again. So it probably just took the authentication cookie that we had in here. So let's test it in another browser to make sure everything is fine. Yeah, so in this case we get back unauthorized, so it does indeed work. Let's now improve our endpoint to filter the specific ID of the track link that we want to get. So in order to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a dynamic route, and I'm going to add the tracked link ID in here, which we can then retrieve from within our Express middleware by calling rec.params track linked ID. Let's console log it here to check if we can actually see it. Now we get, obviously we get the requested resource, what was not found, because we have to add the specific ID of the link that we are looking for. So let's do slash and paste in the ID. Yeah, now we get back our usual data, and we actually get back the ID that we put into rec params. The error that we got here was because we called the incorrect endpoint. So now we have our tracked link ID here. What we need to do now is we need to add it to our pipeline. So only the events that contain this ID should be tracked. So in order to do this, Copilot suggested it. We use the match state, but this is nonsense. What we actually have to do here is add our tracked link ID into our matching stage. So now it only puts elements in the pipeline that are actually relevant to our tracked link. So let's check this out. This is our current endpoint who gives us 2 clicks, a count of 2 clicks. Let's check it again. Yeah, still 2 clicks. Now if we copy our new ID, this should only give us 1 click. Yeah, as you can see, 1 click here. So that thing seems to work. And now we have to adjust our endpoint that we call here with the actual ID that we have in our link click chart. When we create a custom component for a field, Payload actually provides us with a hook called useDocumentInfo, where we can retrieve the ID of the current document. So what I'm going to do is const ID equals useDocumentInfo. And what we can then do is use the ID in our request, and that should fetch the correct data. So let's wait for a second for the server to reboot. And now our charting should work again and only show the data specific to that link. So in here we have 1 click for the LinkedIn, and we have, or we should have, 2 clicks for the Google test. Last but not least for today, I'm going to add a toggle that lets me control the date range. So in our custom component, I'm just going to add a simple select fields and within that I'm going to say option 7 days and also I'm going to have an option for 30 days. Let's see if this shows up. In the meantime, I'm just going to create another state, date range, which is set to 7 days by default. And I'm going to say value, date range, and on input, I'm going to set the date range to eTarget.value. Let's check if this appears in our backend. Yeah, I'm just going to disable dark mode for now. I will ignore it design-wise. We all know how to work with that. So I'm going to go back to tracked links, Google test. Yeah, 7 days is default, but I can set it to 30 days. Now, what we have to do is we have to refetch data if the date range changes. So I'm going to say date range, and I'm going to set this as a dependency for the use effect hook so that this is called again whenever it changes. Now, obviously, we'll have to add the date range to our query. So I'm going to say start date, and I'm also going to specify end date. But first of all, we have to calculate this. So in order to do this, let's create a new variable, say start date. So if the date range equals 7 days, this will basically be 7 days earlier from now. So I'm going to call moment, no, not Monaco environment, moment. I'm going to subtract 7 days in this case, autocomplete, and format it. But I'm not going to format it as it suggests me, but I'm going to say to ISO string, which will basically create a default ISO string. So if it's set to 7 days, it will create the 7-day start date, otherwise the 30-day start date. And for the end date, I'm just going to set the current date to ISO string. So now we can use those values in our query. Okay, and they should actually arrive in our handler as rec.query. So let's console log those first before we use them, just to see how they are formatted. So let's check our console logs. Yeah, it's undefined, which means actually it didn't arrive. Rec.query start date, rec.query end date. Yeah, of course, because we just called it from our browser window, but we actually have to call it from within the component. So we just have to refresh our page, and now actually failed. Yeah, moment is not defined. That's a bad thing. So I will have to import moment from moment. Now it actually tells me that we have an installed moment, which makes sense. So let's refresh our server. Now we get a different error. Subtract to ISO string is not a function. To ISO string. I might have a typo in there. So let's check it. Moment.js to ISO string. The ISO needs to be uppercase, so I can go ahead here, select all those three to ISO string, and that should fix the issue. So now it successfully calls the endpoint, and the endpoint should log our 2 dates. So this is the start date, 7 days. The first one and 1st of March and the 8th of March, which makes sense. Now if I switch it over to 30 days, it should actually call the endpoint again. And now we should get, the 7th of February and the 8th of March. So this actually works. The only thing missing is that we have to use this in our matching stage as well. So as our copilot suggests, we're going to say created at, and we will specify it that it has to be greater than equal to the start date, and it has to be less than equal to the end date. Let's see if that causes any issues or if that works out of the box. It seems to work fine, although since we don't have any old data right now, we can't really test it. Might make sense to revisit this in the future or change our attribute to timestamp that we can actually modify, because we can't really play around with the created at attribute in Payload. Although, to see if it still works, what we can do is in our custom component, instead of subtracting 7 days, what we could do is we could actually first we could add 1 day, or let's say add 2. Sorry, this needs to be a number. So we add 2 days, and we will set the start date to not subtract. I'm just going to comment that out. But we'll set the start date to add 1 day. So in theory, now nothing should appear if the matching works correctly. Let's check that. And indeed, we don't get any data, which means that our matching stage works as intended. Now, this will be it for today. There will be a part 2, but if you do have any questions in the meantime, feel free to let us know down in the comments below. And apart from that, take care and see you in the next video.